Joining me on the phone line right now is Alicia Jessop. She's a sports law professor at the University of Miami. She also writes for Sports Illustrated and The Cauldron, and she joins me right now on the phone. How you doing, Alicia?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing good. So I like to have you on when we have different sports-related stories going on, and I really want to start with this situation with Rutgers. So here at 97.3 ESPN, we're an affiliate of Rutgers football, and I saw this story in the New York Times that followed up. Now, 2 months ago, Rutgers and Adidas just reached a new 6-year deal, with clothing and shoes and all that good stuff. But now the New York Times story comes out that they are $28.6 million is the athletic department in deficit. That is a larger deficit than every other Big Ten athletic department combined. Alicia, one of the reasons why Rutgers joined the Big Ten was because the idea is that this was going to help their marquee, help them financially, and it seems like that either it's not helping them or they're actually just misspending their money.
So I don't know if we can blame this deficit entirely on the move to the Big Ten, but there's an old adage that goes, you have to spend money to make money. So if I'm a person in the Rutgers Athletics Department listening to this interview or reading the New York Times story, and this is alluded to in the New York Times story, I would say this. Everyone just sit and wait. We haven't received our full payout from the Big Ten yet. That's a couple years away. When that happens in a couple of years, we will be in a much different financial situation. So that's what the athletics department is going to say. But on the flip side, there's people looking at the economics who are a bit more skeptical, saying, well, is this really a matter of the full Big Ten payments not coming to the university yet? Or is this a matter of financial and managerial mismanagement? What you have at Rutgers that you don't necessarily have at other Big Ten or Power 5 conference schools are some pretty high-profile terminations of employees that have been costly to the athletics department. So that's part of the problem. But then if you dig into the report, that the financial report that the New York Times received from an open records request from Rutgers, you start seeing some pretty big expenditures that maybe could have been cut down in cost or maybe were unnecessary. One such expenditure was a $7 million payment to get out of a marketing deal with a third-party vendor. So there's a couple of things at play, Josh. One, college sports is fascinating because to terminate an employee, even if there is reason or cause to terminate the employee, it oftentimes costs millions of dollars to get rid of that person. There's not too many business models in America that operate that way. And so that's one thing that's really causing heavy burden on athletics departments financially are the terminations of coaches and athletics directors. So you have that, and you have that coupled with maybe some mismanagement of funds and overspending on particular items. And then with those two things, you have the transition into the Big Ten. And that goes back to you have to spend money to make money adage, because my hunch is that Rutgers' cost of competition skyrocketed when they moved into that conference because you have to spend more money to remain competitive against tougher opponents.
Do you think that, again, hindsight's 2020, do you think there may be, because Rutgers has basically been a very poor athletically since joining, really the only sport they're legitimately competitive in is women's basketball and wrestling. Do you think there may be some people in the Big Ten who may wonder, was this really the best idea? Because the idea of bringing the Rutgers in was they're going to get the New York market, they can tap into the Philadelphia market, and now maybe are they possibly wondering, was this such a good idea?
I don't think so. I don't think the level of competition would have the Big Ten wondering if it was such a good idea. I do think some of the issues arising in the athletics department, whether it is the Coach Rice situation, the various athletic directors that have been terminated, some of the off the field and off the court issues that athletes have been involved in. I think that might have the Big Ten scratching their heads a little bit more than, okay, well, they're not performing at their highest level of competition. I think that was to be expected, that it would take the men's basketball and football teams a couple of years to readjust into a more competitive conference. But at the end of the day, things go in waves. And so some years teams are competitive, other years they're struggling. And if Rutgers hits a good wave where they're competitive again, it's going to benefit the Big Ten because, like you alluded to, they have their feet now in those huge media markets, which are highly lucrative to the conference. And so wrapped up in that is another interesting perspective. Rutgers is running a huge deficit, but Rutgers is located with very easy access to some of the biggest media markets in America. And what we know is that media drives revenue greater than any other factor in college sports and pretty much every sport. So broadcasting contracts are the biggest source of revenue in sports. It's not the Adidas deal. The Adidas deal is never going to bring you anywhere close to the amount of money that a broadcasting contract can. And so that's kind of the anomaly here, Josh, is you have this university sitting in this huge media market, and it's their location which makes the Big Ten network contract so valuable, but yet the school sitting in that media market is running a huge deficit. And so we have to ask ourselves why. And I think it goes back to what I was alluding to, mismanagement of funds, overspending, and some just really poor hiring decisions.
We're talking with Alicia Jessop. You can follow her on Twitter at Ruling Sports. She's a sports law professor at the University of Miami. Alicia, transitioning over to the professional ranks, NFL free agency, it's hot and heavy at this time of year every year. I'm seeing a trend, and that trend is a lot of one-year contracts. Alshon Jeffery, Chance Warmack with the Eagles, Benny Logan with the Chiefs, Terrell Pryor with the Redskins. It's very interesting because traditionally teams, you would usually sign guys to 2, 3, 4-year deals in free agency, and people keep using the term prove-it deals. Do you think this is a reflection of just what's going on in 2017, or could this be a new trend moving forward for the NFL?
I think this is certainly a new trend, at least until the new collective bargaining agreement is negotiated. That would be in 2021. But you have to realize there is huge risk involved on both sides of an NFL contract. There's risk to the player, there's risk to the team. And currently there's only 3 ways that a player's contract can be guaranteed. If I'm a high-level veteran in free agency, I want a fully guaranteed contract. My body is taking a beating. My career life is really short. And so I want to know that I'm going to have the greatest amount of access to income as possible. So I want a fully guaranteed contract. Well, if I'm a general manager or an NFL team owner, I don't want to fully guarantee a 3 to 4 year contract when I know the lifespan of an NFL football player, which, by the way, is decreasing. How many years NFL players play in the league has decreased year over year. So I don't want to guarantee something that I'm not going to reap a benefit for. And so honestly, the 1-year deal could, in some cases, benefit both sides, where if a player has a career-ending injury, now the team, if they guarantee the contract for injury, isn't left paying out on a contract that they're receiving nothing for. But on the flip side, if a player has an awesome year and just performs at a super high level, he's able to up his contract moving forward and get another deal. So from a player's perspective, a 1-year contract is never ideal. Your ideal is going to get the greatest number of years guaranteed. But what we're seeing is that the business, and here the business is the NFL, the team owners and the general managers, they're aware of the risk involved in offering that type of contract. And so what I think is happening, Josh, is that type of contract is coming off of the table.
One of the contracts I was just mentioning, Alshon Jeffery, the way it breaks out is, it's first, how the media is, they report it as first just a lump sum, the $14 million. But then you break it down, it's a base salary of $1 million. It's a signing bonus of $7.75 million. And then there's about $4.5 million of incentives. Are you surprised that more teams and players don't opt for that option because the player is still getting a lump sum up front. And then the back end of the deal, whether it's a 1-year deal or multiple years, that there's not more incentive-laden deals.
Incentives are risky because they aren't guaranteed. Your player has to do XYZ thing, and if XYZ thing doesn't happen, well, guess what? Your player doesn't get that money. And so, from an agent's perspective, incentives are fun things to negotiate into a contract. They're kind of the sexy things on the table, if you will. But if you're representing an athlete, your goal is to get the athlete the greatest amount of money now, or guaranteed. I don't care how many years are on the contract if there's no guarantee that the athlete I'm representing is receiving money during each of those years. And I kind of think of incentives as red herrings, so things that look good, but when you really look below the surface, there's nothing there. And you have to really counsel your client on that and say, look, we want more upfront money than back-end money because the upfront money is guaranteed, and I know it's going in your pocket, where you're working in this highly dangerous and risky field where you could be out game one of the preseason, and there goes millions of dollars and access to those dollars out the door.
We're talking with Alicia Jessop. You can follow her on Twitter at Rolling Sports. She's a sports law professor at the University of Miami, also a writer for Sports Illustrated and The Cauldron. Alicia, in the college ranks, one of the big stories with the NCAA tournament right now is UCLA. Lonzo Ball, he's probably going to go in the top 3 in the NBA draft this year, but it's his father who just can't stay out of the news. And I feel like you have a very unique perspective because you do cover the sports business and the legal aspects of this stuff. Lavar has basically created a brand for his kids before they even step a day in the NBA, before they even get drafted, with T-shirts and branding, ball or fall and the triple Bs and all this stuff. So is Lavar smart in basically building a brand for his kids, or is he just taking advantage of his kids and living vicariously through them?
Well, I think we need to ask ourselves first what kind of brand he's building for his kids, because if you follow the media, he's kind of a polarizing figure. People are like, look, just let your kid do what he needs to do. Like your kid's not LeBron yet, so stop saying that he can beat LeBron or he can be better than Steph Curry, because he's neither at this point. And so he's setting his child up for some pretty wild expectations where if the kid fails, and now what he's doing essentially by setting that expectation is if Lonzo Ball comes into the league and he's anything less than Steph Curry or LeBron James, he's going to be written off as a has-been or could have been or never was, and a failure. And so I think that part's unfair. I do think, though, that he's doing something really fascinating, because the NCAA has such strict bylaws about what an athlete can or cannot do to maintain his or her amateurism. And to put it the most simply, a college athlete cannot accept anything of monetary value outside of an athletic scholarship for his or her athleticism. And so what Lonzo Ball's dad is doing is he's basically skirting around those NCAA bylaws and marketing his son, where if Lonzo was doing this himself, guess what? Lonzo would not be playing ball for UCLA ever again. And so that's what I think is really fascinating, and honestly, I think it's smart. You wonder what the NCAA is doing or thinking behind the scenes and what kind of investigations are unfolding. My heart kind of hurts for the compliance officials at UCLA, because I know the NCAA has to be investigating whether any of this money is reaching Lonzo Ball's hands. And if even a penny does, there's a huge eligibility concern. So to answer your question a little bit more succinctly, I think it's a very creative way to maneuver around the NCAA bylaws. But what he's doing at this point in time could be more harmful to his son than is beneficial. Let his work on the court be the hype. If his work on the court is good enough, he will make enough money on the court in the NBA to take care of his family for years and years to come. His father does not need to be the hype guy.
Do you think this is just another reflection of the fact that the NCAA rules on some of this stuff are way too just fluid and not specific? Because so many times we see things happen, whether it's with Lavar Ball or, people complain that, Baylor's being treated differently than Penn State, that, the University of Miami back in the early 90s was treated differently than UCLA was around the same time. So do you think this gets back to the fact that the NCAA really needs to become more clear and concise and consistent with a lot of this stuff?
Well, I think it's really sad when we're talking about a rule book that is over 300 pages long and it's not clear. If you can't make yourself clear in 300 pages, there's something hugely wrong with your messaging. You and I both work in media, and what our training tells us is say it in as few words as possible. So, yeah, I think there are some problems, but I don't think it's so much in clarity of the rules as in how the NCAA chooses to apply those rules. Because we've seen a similar situation a few years ago with Johnny Manziel. Now, granted, Manziel's family wasn't hyping him to the media the way that Lonzo Ball's father is, but there was some interesting back dealings and setting Johnny up for a business future. Remember, there was a man who began selling Johnny football T-shirts. And so there was a trademark issue at play. Well, Johnny was still an amateur under NCAA standards, so that prevented him from trademarking his name at the time. And so what his family did is they created a separate LLC. An LLC is not a person. So it's Johnny is not the LLC. And they were able to skirt around and back end through the NCAA's rules. And so we're seeing something similar with Lonzo Ball's father. But what's interesting is he is proactively selling the merchandise, where at the time, Manziel's family was not proactively selling the merchandise. They were just protecting their son's name and the trademark associated with it.
We're talking with Alicia Jessop. She's a sports law professor at the University of Miami, sports writer for Sports Illustrated in the Cauldron. You can follow her on Twitter at Ruling Sports. Also check out her website, rulingsports.com. Alicia, I always appreciate the insight and the depth of knowledge that you bring. Before I let you go, as usual, I have to ask you about your school, Miami. You know how much I love the U, but I have to know from you, Miami is in the tournament. Do you think they have a chance to make it far this year?
Oh, that's a tough place to put a professor in, Josh. Yeah, the professor in me says they're going to go all the way. The realist in me says they have a lot of hurdles to cross. They're in an interesting region. I think I was looking at the bracket. I think they can make it to the Sweet 16, which is kind of painful for me to say because I'm hosting a big sport industry conference. You can learn about it at Miami Sport without an S conference.com. And Blake James, our AD, is supposed to speak at it. But if the team is in the Sweet 16, he will, of course, miss the conference. So obviously I want the team to go as far as they can. And I think they have a pretty decent shot, given their region, to make it to the Sweet 16.
Well, we know Larinaga has led some teams to pretty great runs before, so keep your fingers crossed, right?
Yep.
Alicia, always appreciate the time.
Thank you.